Hi, everybody. A very warm welcome to today's session. It's lovely to have you all. By way of introduction, my name is Stephen. I'm part of IBM Trusteer. I've been with Trusteer for about 6 years now, first as a fraud analyst, working with existing clients to understand their frauds in the online channels and to create the policy that will identify those risky accesses into accounts. I now work as a pre-sales engineer to try and assist potential companies to break down their frauds and see how Trusteer can solve for them. Today, I'm going to talk on 3 topics. Firstly, what it is that Trusteer does. Secondly, how Trusteer detects fraud in the online channels. And thirdly, I'm going to do a demo to show the data that we collect to identify risky behavior in these online channels. I will be presenting in English. I will talk slowly and hopefully clearly enough that everybody can understand. I'm now going to share my presentation. It's a short presentation of about 8 slides. And by the end of it, I hope that everybody will really understand what Trusteer does and why Trusteer is considered best in class when it comes to online fraud prevention. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, everybody should be able to see my screen. So let's discuss.
Sorry, Stephen, we still cannot see your screen. Can you please double check?
My apologies. There we go. Now you should be able to see the screen. So from the top, let's break down what Trusteer is and what role Trusteer can play in fraud prevention. Firstly, Trusteer provides prevention at what we call the new account registration phase, i.e. the unknown registrants, those people who are not yet a customer of the bank or the insurance company or any other online industry. I'm going to use the word bank today as a generic, but we cover e-commerce, retail, insurance, airlines, etc. So at the beginning, before we know who the customer is, Trusteer will try and identify if this registration should be approved. Once that registration has been approved, we now move into what we call the account takeover stage, where credentials are compromised or a fraudster will try access an account in order to commit financial fraud. The reason why companies like Trusteer have a role to play is simply because the market is getting more aggressive. The fraudsters are getting more and more tuned up, more sophisticated, and the effects of that is absolutely devastating on the market right now. Those who do not have adequate protection will definitely suffer from financial losses. So where does Trusteer provide its detection? In the web and the mobile channels. The web meaning your URL, www.bank.com, for example, and in the mobile channel would be the application for the bank. So how does Trusteer do this? We'll get into it in more detail later on. We'll deploy what's known as a snippet in the web channel. It's a very small piece of code that will allow Trusteer to collect the data in order to analyze the data, their access, and see if there's any sort of risky behavior. In the mobile channel, Trusteer will deploy a mobile SDK in the application itself, and like the snippet in the web channel, will give Trusteer the ability to receive that data, to analyze it, and make a decision on the next actions to take. Very importantly, what we're seeing right now is that the trend is towards accesses from the mobile channel. North of 80% of all accesses are from the mobile channel. That's up from about 50% 5 years ago, and it'll probably settle at in and around 80%. But 4 out of every 5 accesses does come from the mobile channel, and we need to have adequate protection in order to prevent unauthorized payments. So what does the industry look like right now? What are we protecting against? On average, the industry is suffering from $3 billion a year to new account fraud losses. That's the unknown registrations who are registering for services, for cards, for loans, etc., having stolen credentials with the attempt to pass those debts over to the legitimate individuals. $6.5 billion a year in annual account takeover fraud. That's been shared by the banks. Most of the time, the banks is taking a knock on that amount, depending on their approach to these types of frauds. What is very interesting and continues to grow is the losses that are being taken simply due to bad experience, poor customer experience, overreach in MFA, overreach in 2FA, unnecessary customer friction causing abandonment in shopping carts, inability to complete registration forms, inability to sign up for new services. And finally, what we call stolen credentials. Credentials that have been thefted. We'll talk about all the different techniques of social engineering, vishing, smishing, phishing, malware, etc., to extract credentials from legitimate individuals, where that fraudster can either use it to register for services, use it to log into an account and commit fraud, or sell that on the dark web, meaning sell it to other fraudsters who are then interested in using that information to try commit financial fraud. Trusteer does scan the dark web, in order to understand the patterns of behavior to see where emerging threats are coming from. So let's understand Trusteer in a bit more detail. We've covered the fact that it's a new account and it's account takeover, and that is the web and the mobile. But let's go into a little bit more detail. So first thing, as we said, protecting across that online channel in the account opening stage, and obviously in the profiled account takeover stage as well. Now, where this gets interesting is you'll see that there are 4 boxes on the screen: account opening, account access, account management, and the transaction itself. Account opening, we've spoken about. Let's talk a little bit about account takeover. Trusteer performs multiple assessments of an access into an account, and for good reason. Very often, a vendor is not able to detect fraud or to detect unusual behavior at the time of login, and needs to run multiple assessments in the session to root out unusual behavior. An example of what I mean is remote access tool. For those who are not familiar with remote access tool, that is when an individual like myself can log into somebody else's computer and run the computer from my device using a remote access tool like TeamViewer, AnyDesk, etc. Now, what the fraudster does in this particular scam is he will contact the victim, often by telephone, tell them that their account has been hacked, someone's trying to steal all their money, and you need to move the funds into a new account. And this fraudster has the account and it's their account. So the victim panics and says, what do I do next? The fraudster says, I will remote access tool and I will help you move the funds out of this account into the new account. But what the fraudster does very cleverly is the fraudster says, log in and I will only remote access after you've logged in. They do this for 2 reasons. Firstly, they do it to build a reputation with the victim, to say, I don't want your credentials, you log in, I don't want to see them, to build a reputation. And secondly, to try evade detection at the time of login. So Trusteer must run multiple assessments in the session to see that now post-login, there's an indication of a remote access tool. The same applies to certain types of malwares that only become apparent post the login. So Trusteer will run assessments at login, in the session itself, in the risky pages like add beneficiary, pay funds, etc. And obviously at the time of transaction, we will look at the amount and the currency. where the funds are going to. So Trusteer provides a full end-to-end coverage from account opening all the way to transaction itself. So let's look at the three major types of fraud, or the three major categories of fraud. They are credential theft, social engineering, and service abuse, and I'll break each one of them down. Credential theft is when your credentials are stolen without you knowing that they've been stolen via phishing or smishing, malware, etc. So Trusteer has different ways to identify that access that happens is as a result of stolen credentials. For example, behavioral anomaly, the way the fraudster is accessing the account, the way they're interacting with the website or the application is different than what we know about the legitimate individual. Device identification, by looking at that device and saying, is it a spoofed device? Is it familiar to this individual? Have we seen this device before? Is the device new? If the device is not new, how does it differ from what we've seen by this profiled individual in the past? Malware is an overlay. Did we detect a malware on the device? Does that malware have financial fraud capabilities? Does it have SMS stealer capabilities, etc.? An overlay, which is mobile malware, which is where you believe you are giving your credentials to your bank. You've downloaded an application. You've downloaded an application that looks like your application, but you're handing the credentials over to the fraudster, who can then log in, register for services, or sell that information. Human-like bots, certain applications that behave like humans, try to request access, username and password, but then behave in specific ways in the session that tend us or convince us this is actually a bot, not a human. And finally, a risky device profile. Has this device been seen before in fraud? Is it part of Trusteer's consortium of bad data, bad devices, bad IPs, bad bank accounts? Those we have seen before and listed as fraudulent. From a social engineering point of view, which is really where the market of fraud is growing right now, is when the victim is part of the fraud without being aware that they're contributing to the financial loss. They're included in the scam, including the example I gave you earlier of remote access tool. So I've already spoken about how fraudsters use a remote access tool. Trusteer will identify it. Trusteer will identify transactional anomalies. Is it a first-time payee? Have we seen this before? Is it a risky payee? Is the amount unusual compared to what we know about this individual? Is the currency unusual compared to what we know about this profiled individual? Is there a call in progress? I mentioned it as part of the example. The victim receives a telephone call, and then we see things like installation of remote access tool, adding a new beneficiary, paying away large amounts of funds. And finally, behavioral biometrics and navigation flow. Behavioral biometrics is looking at the keypad, the mouse movements, and the swipe behavior of an individual to see if this is known or if this is somebody new. And finally, navigation flow, which is how they interact with the site, the time on the page. Are they copying and pasting in credentials? Are they unsure of the page relative to the profiled individual? And finally, service abuse. Service abuse relates directly to the account opening stage, is when you try use credentials to create synthetic accounts or mule accounts, or to get access onto the system, move funds out of certain accounts. And in doing that, Trusteer will look at not only the device and the network, if there's a malware, if there's a remote access tool, etc. It will also look at the information that's been jotted on the form, the name, the email address, the telephone number, etc. And it will run that past third-party vendors to validate that that registration information belongs to this individual. So if I, as Stephen, am registering for a service, but I'm using somebody else's email address or somebody else's telephone number, it would be an indication of a highly suspicious registration. So now that we have a very strong idea of Trusteer, I'm now going to look about Trusteer's coverage worldwide. And the next two slides will go into detail about why this is necessary to have a global vendor. But what you can see on the slide is that Trusteer covers all 6 continents and has a massive presence in certain dominant markets like the US, in South America, Australia, in Europe, in the UK, in France and Spain. Certainly in Japan as well. Let me say it like this: whenever somebody's looking for a threat vendor, someone that can detect this types of threats that we're talking about, you need a global vendor. And I'm going to explain to you on the next slide why you need a global vendor. Trusteer covers all 6 continents, has a presence everywhere. This is important because threats begin in one area, one geolocation in the world, and will quickly spread to other geolocations. A vendor that does not cover the entire planet will not know if new threats are emerging and therefore will not be able to protect some of their customers in other areas. So whilst there are very good vendors in specific geolocations, or like in Western Europe, a sort of middle Western Europe, in the US, etc., those that have a global coverage tend to have better results because they can identify frauds and prevent for them. A classic example of what I'm referring to is overlay. Overlay is the mobile malware that I mentioned earlier. The fraudster puts on the system for download in the app stores in Google Play, something that looks like the bank or the vendor's or the provider's application. The victim believes that they're logging in, meanwhile they're handed credentials over. Mobile malware began in Brazil in March of 2020, so about 4.5 years ago. It was unseen before then. Trusteer has a very big presence in South America and a very strong presence in Brazil. When our Brazilian customers started to report on this, we started investigating it and understood this was a new threat that was emerging. That threat of mobile malware within 3 months made its way over into Spain, and today, with call in progress or social engineering, is Spain's biggest threat, and the largest number of frauds come from overlay attacks. So with Trusteer's global view, having learnt it, been quick onto it, researched it, had the ability to understand what makes up a mobile overlay, was able to begin providing protection in Spain. And within a few short months, rather than starting when it got to Spain, we were 3 months ahead of that curve and ahead of some of our competitors in that area who only became aware of it when their clients began telling them that there were frauds that they had not seen before. So if we look at this global map, we can see some of the risks in the market right now. But we'll also see something interesting, that they tend to be common across most areas. So I would always get questions like, what is common in our area? Is our area unique compared to the rest of the world? I would say generally the threats go into some of the major categories. For example, phishing, advanced phishing in the US. It's a global threat. Overlay attacks, we see it in South America, we see it in Europe, and we see certain types of malwares in Australia. The US has probably the most sophisticated frauds out there, and certainly the ones that keep us on our toes. Things like credential stuffing, which is where hackers would write algorithms to try and create millions of different combinations of usernames and passwords to try get a hit and then to try access an account. For example, in South Africa, which is a less technically savvy population, The more simple, tried and tested frauds like phishing always do well. People receive an email in English or an SMS in English. The majority of the population speak English, but not as a first language, will be convinced this is a legitimate communication from the bank, click on the link, hand over the credentials, and the fraudster can then log into the account. If we look at some of Trusteer's numbers, what a global consortium would mean for any new potential client of Trusteer's, we're currently analyzing 80 billion different events per month across about 250 different customers worldwide, currently protecting 600 million identities. So those are individuals who bank, or again, I'm using the word bank, those who are customers of our clients. Our clients are the banks and insurance companies, etc. The most talked about stat right now is, and I get asked this all the time, how many mobile devices do you protect? If you think of the first slide, Trusteer can see that 80% of all accesses are in the mobile channel. Right now, about 200 million devices are under Trusteer's protection. About 60% of those are in Europe itself. On the previous slide, I mentioned that we had a very strong presence in France. In France, for example, 1 in every 2 mobile devices is currently protected by Trusteer. Of the plus minus 68 million people in France, 34 million of them bank with the banks that Trusteer currently protect. So 3 more slides before I get to a short demo. I'm just quickly checking the time. Great, we're on track. So how does Trusteer work? I've mentioned a lot of this in the previous slides. I'm going to bring it all together now. So firstly, as we've mentioned multiple times, we protect the web and the mobile channels. Trusteer will deploy a snippet in the web channel. It's a short piece of JavaScript code. It's no more than 5 or 6 lines. That code allows Trusteer to collect the device data, network data, behavioral elements, etc., and analyze it. Likewise, in the mobile channel with an SDK embedded in the application itself, gives Trusteer the ability to collect that data. 2 questions I'm often asked at this stage. Is this an agent-based system? It's not. It's entirely agentless, meaning that the bank's end customers do not interact with Trusteer in any way. Certainly in the web channel, it doesn't impact performance. They don't need to download anything. They don't need to install anything, pop-ups, headers, etc. There's no knowledge that Trusteer is on the back end. Likewise, for the SDK, it's embedded in the application. Many online businesses, not only banks, will have multiple SDKs within their bank or within their application. It's very small, and Trusteer can show that both the snippets in the web channel and the SDK in the mobile channel does not impact performance at all and will not require anything of the customer. In the mobile channel, there are some basic permissions that the customer will need to accept. I won't go into the detail on today's discussion, but more than 90% of our banks ensure that the customers accept these permissions, because it not only enables Trusteer to collect more data, it also enables the bank to provide a better service. And one of those permissions is location. The bank or the retailer or the site want to know where they can deliver to them or send them to the nearest branch. So they're already making their customers accept those permissions. But for the most part, it's agentless. It's a cloud-based SaaS solution, and the end customer doesn't interact with Trusteer. So Trusteer runs its snippets or the SDK multiple times, as you spoke about in a lot of detail, in order to collect that data. The question is now, and I'll spend about 8 minutes or so explaining what Trusteer does with that data. Firstly, everything is run via an API, which is just a simple integration that allows Trusteer to collect that data. All the data that we have, and I'm going to show you in the demo what that means, is almost always classified into 5 major categories of the device, the location, the behavior, the malware, and the network itself. So we're collecting hundreds of different data points, and for the most part, they're categorized into one of these 5 major categories of data. Once this data has been collected, and I will mention it now, via the API, it is near real time. So very often I'm asked, but if we want to prevent the funds from leaving an account, the API will ensure that. The way Trusteer will feed the feeds into a third-party authentication tool or orchestration tool is real time, and therefore the prevention of the funds or the prevention of the transaction can be done in advance, not try to reclaim the funds after the fact. So once the data has been collected, Trusteer will analyze this, and it will start looking at this data and compare it to the profile. What do we know about this individual? New? Is it not new? When did we first see this in this customer's profile? Or when did we first see this information in the region? Is this device new to the region? Has this device accessed multiple different accounts? Likewise, we're looking for abnormal behavior, indications of emulators, proxies, virtual machines, remote access tool, malwares, SMS stealers, etc. Things that you would not expect from a legitimate access and a legitimate individual. We'll look for outright fraud patterns. So a new device accesses an account immediately after a malware infection on the legitimate user's device. That is highly synonymous with a fraudulent behavior, or installation of a malware, or a new currency and a very large amount. So those patterns that tell us, based on what we know about the individual, this is now considered highly unusual. And finally, consortium data. These are our list of bad actors. So known fraudster devices, known IP ranges, high-risk countries, high-risk languages, high-risk ISPs, and certainly high-risk bank accounts. All of these things that have been seen in fraud before, the minute it tries to use that data again to access an account, Trusteer will provide an alert. So let's talk about the alert for a few minutes. I think if there's anything to take away from today's session, I think it is this: what does Trusteer provide to its customers, to the bank or the insurance company? Once Trusteer has analyzed all the data, it has a responsibility to provide a score, a reason, and a recommendation. And the scoring works like this. Trusteer will analyze 100% of all accesses or new account registrations. Let's focus on accesses for now, account takeover. Every access will receive a score. If it is a legitimate access with no friction, they will get a score of 0. If it is a risky access, they will get a score of between 500 and 1,000. And as the risk is more certain, the score will go up. So a known fraudster device in the consortium data will get a score of 1,000 because you do not want any further interaction with this individual. They are known bad actors. A new device following a malware infection will get a score of, say, 900 because it's almost guaranteed to be fraud, but isn't just yet. And things like remote access tool could get something like a 650 because that's highly suspicious because this person's never used a remote access tool before, but it could be used for a legitimate purpose as well. So a known fraudster device, a malware, there's no chance it's good, but a remote access tool, even an emulator, for example, could be used for legitimate reasons. So the score would be 0, friction-free for legitimate access, between 500 and 1,000 for highly suspicious access. Once we provided the score, we also give a reason for the score. So we tell the bank why we're giving it the score, anything like a known fraudster device, indication of a malware, a spoof device, risky country, risky language, risky ISP, for example. So we tell them what it is. It could be velocity, multiple accesses from the same device, or multiple accesses from different devices into the same account. So we've got a score, we've got a reason, and on your screen you'll see the recommendation itself. The recommendation will be what we suggest the next action should be. So the recommendation would be allow login if everything is in order, deny access if it's a known fraudster device, allow login restrict, meaning we'll allow the access until they go to a risky page. Then we might force an MFA or a 2FA or something to validate the user. So when all is said and done, all this work being done behind the scenes, we pass on the score, reason, recommendation to the bank to take further action. And in the demo, I'll show you that as part of all the other data collections. Trusteer will also provide an alert and reporting by way of our front-end trust board, our GUI. I'll show you that also as part of the demo. The two ways that an individual or bank rather can identify or analyze fraud is via the API, which I'll show, also via the trust board I'll show in the demo. And finally, we need the bank to give us feedback on, was this a successful alert? Was it unsuccessful? Was it a false positive? And we need this feedback and encourage it so that we can better tune the models, we can better train our logics to be more specific and to alert more efficiently. 2 more slides and we'll get to the demo. This is the slide with the most amount of detail, but don't worry, I'll talk you through it. This is just broadening Trusteer's detection capabilities into 8 major categories of behavior, device, network, malicious tooling, the account itself, intelligence, transactions, and access. I won't talk to all of them. I'll just mention some of them that we haven't yet mentioned, and I'll reinforce some of the more severe ones. So from a behavior point of view, we are going to talk about behavior biometrics. It's very much part of Trusteer's offering. In the next slide, we'll go into even more detail on it. Cross-channel attack means that the victim may be using their web browser to access the account, but the fraudster steals credentials and tries to log in from the mobile. If Trusteer is covering both web and mobile, the ability to understand the access cross-channel as being fraudulent is there because we've done such a good profiling job on the other channel. So they log in via the web, the fraudster logs in via the mobile. What we know about the web will give us an indication if this access is fraudulent on the mobile device. From a device point of view, we want to know more about this device. Have we seen it before? Is it new? How is it behaving? Is it giving an indication of a spoofed device, or is it trying to hide something from us? From a network point of view, is there a VPN? Is there a call in progress? Is the carrier risky? Is the ISP risky? Is it new in the account? Is the location new? All these things are going to combine. And on the next screen, I'll go through it in more detail to give us a picture of unusual accesses. Malicious tooling, virtual machines and emulators, malwares, remote accesses, etc. Spoken about this in great detail. The account itself, is it new? What does this first access look like? Is it an unusually high transaction for first access? Was the account dormant and now we see an access and suspicious behavior, and so on and so forth. I've spoken all about our consortium data of bad actors already. The minute they will try to use that information to access the account, Trusteer will respond with a score of 1,000 and deny. And finally, the transaction itself. Trusteer does a lot of transactional analysis. We'll look at the date and time of the transaction, the currency, the amount, if the beneficiary is new, when the beneficiary was added, the currency, is this a bill payment, is it a recurring payment? All these things are important to know, because if it's a regular recurring payment to a known service provider like the municipality, that would be far less of a risk than a new payee added and we're paying funds away of a large amount in a new currency to an unknown beneficiary. So the final slide of today to bring this all together is, how does Trusteer combine the device, the network or location, and behavioral data? There are vendors out there who will claim that they can do all their analysis on behavior only. This is simply false. It cannot be done. Behavior cannot detect a malware on a device. Behavior cannot see that the currency is new or that the device is new. Therefore, Trusteer uses 3 major components of device, network, and behavior to combine all of them into the assessment. And the results are always there: a reduced number of alerts and high accuracy in the alerting. So let's work through an example. We have a device. The device is new in the account. It's never been seen before. Now, that is not risky to Trusteer whatsoever, a new device in the account. But the device isn't like the previous device. The language is new on this device. And the device, for example, is an Android. This person only ever used iPhone. We're seeing already a pattern that is not normal for this individual. Plus the fact that the location is new, and for this individual, they've never visited this location before. So now we've got a combination of a new device with risky device attributes, plus a location that's not been seen before, and the way that they are interacting with the account by the way that they are using the behavioral biometrics is not what we've seen before. They might be using copy and paste versus putting in credentials. Their time on their page is unusual. We might see something like scrolling on the screen like I'm doing right now. So the combination of all 3 of device, network, and behavior is absolutely important in having an effective fraud prevention vendor. Any vendor who tells you they can do it with behavioral biometrics, I'd love to have a discussion with them. So that concludes the presentation portion. I'm now going to move to a demonstration. You should be able to see my screen. I'm now on a page known as the IBM Trusteer Demo Control Center. If you don't see a blue screen, please let me know. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to role play a legitimate access and a fraudulent access. I'm going to show you the results in the API, and I'm going to show you the trust board. I have 22 minutes left, and it should be enough time to show all 3 of those. So first and foremost, as I mentioned, Trusteer provides its services in all the online industries: banking, insurance, airline, e-commerce, and remote workforce. We're going to focus on banking. I'm going to start off with a legitimate access because, as I mentioned before, the majority of accesses should be legitimate. They should be friction-free. We do not want to enforce MFA if we don't have to. We want the customer to go from start to finish without any blockages unless there's a reason to do so. So the very first access would be a legitimate user who's logging into his bank. For demonstration purposes, that's known as Trust Me Bank. Logging in from his device, and everything is normal and everything is what we would expect it to see. Before I log in, just 2 comments. Number 1, on the slide you saw before, the device, network, and behavior, at the end of this click-through demo, you'll see this again. You'll see the relationship between them. Secondly, when I log in, on the right-hand side of the screen where my mouse is now, you will see a shield. A blue shield tells us that Trusteer is analyzing and everything is good, and a red shield will tell us that something is unusual. So let's do a login. For the sake of time, I'll just make up somebody's details. Let's call it Timothy steve@bank.com, is logging into his legitimate account, putting in his username and his password. I'm just going to keep that for later. He logs into his account, and we can see two things. Firstly, access is granted, no friction. Secondly, Blue Shield tells us at this stage everything is in order. So Timothy checks out his account, wants to make sure everything is in order. Before he does, what he wanted to do is pay funds away to a known beneficiary. He pays his funds away to David, $1,000 USD, clicks transfer money, everything is successful. This is what we would expect. This is what we want. It was a customer-free experience. So let's see what Trusteer understood about this access. Many words on the slide. Don't worry, I'll talk you through all of them. Firstly, it's a trusted access, meaning that this person has logged in, and as before, there's been no change in device, network, behavior. Everything is in order. We gave a score of 0 out of 1,000, friction-free. The recommendation was allow login, meaning that no additional friction because there's no reason to. So from a device point of view, without reading all of them on the screen, the device is trusted, meaning we've seen it before and it's behaving responsibly. There's no indication of an infection or spoofing of the device. It's not part of the fraud consortium. It's not a known fraudster device. And there's no velocity, meaning that this device hasn't been trying to access multiple accounts or hasn't been seen with other devices trying to access a particular account. From a session point of view, the location is known, the IP address is good, there's no malicious injection of malware, no indication of phishing, and there's no sensitive user action. A sensitive user action is a transaction. This transaction was good because it was a known beneficiary and the amount was considered normal. And from an identity point of view, we can see that everything matches up. The way I typed in the information, the way I texted it, the way the text was typed, the amount of time I spent on the page, behavioral biometrics, etc. Now let's go to the most technical part of the day, and this is what we call the API. I'm going to return, forgive me, I'm not sure why it did that. I'm going to return all the data for the session. And we're going to look at it in a little bit of detail to see just how much data does Trusteer return. Now, I'm not going to go into all the detail for lack of time, but I'll read you the headings and then I'll go into some of the points. All of this information is available to our customers via API. So we have the device, we have the network, we have the mobile attributes, we have the browser attributes, we have behavioral insights, transactional intelligence, network intelligence. This is the risk portion that we put on the previous screen. The most important part is the score, the reason, and the recommendation that can be fed through to a third-party tool to take specific actions. And finally, device intelligence. So I'll spend about just a few minutes talking through some of this data because there's so much of it. From a we can see if the language is new. We can see the screens. Why is the language important? Because a new language is highly risky for a profiled individual. If the screens don't match the makeup of the device, that's risky. And maybe there'd be an odd OS or CPU combination telling us that the device has been spoofed. From a location point of view, you can see everything: my city, my ISP, my region, and my IP. This comes from a third party, IP, a third party known as Maxmind, and we use that to validate the location. From a mobile point of view, we can see if there are root hiders on the device, if they've been damaged, if developer settings have been tampered with, if there are SMS stealers on the device, if there's a virtual environment. We can see if There's a call in progress. We can see there's an emulator. We can even see the number of installed applications on the device. And of course, the device might not have Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, etc. It might only have banking applications, would be a strong indication of unusual behavior. From a browser point of view, we can see the languages again on the device, very strong indication of unusual behavior. A browser downgrade would also be considered unusual. From a behavioral point of view, we would look at the behavioral pattern and pass a score on whether or not we believe this was the legitimate individual. From a transactional point of view, was it the first time we've seen this payee? Is it a known fraudster payee? And finally, just to go into a bit more detail, we can see if this device is new. If the device is new, if it's not new. If it's not new, when did we first see it? How many times have we seen this device? And is this device considered risky? So we give you exquisite detail into the device to make sure that if we've seen it before, how many times have we seen it? And where have we seen it? It might have accessed 25 different accounts over a 2-day period. We would consider that highly unusual. So that is the API in a nutshell. I'm then going to go back to the demo, do a fraudulent access, and then I'm going to show you the front-end trust board, and that will conclude the session for today. So we can close that. Now I'm going to do a login from let's do a user flow anomaly. In this particular example, we have a fraudster that may have overtaken credentials, but is not, in fact, forgive me, I'm actually going to do a different example. I think this one will be a little bit quicker. Account takeover. In this situation, we have a fraudster that has stolen credentials. The credentials have been compromised, maybe through phishing or some other way. The fraudster is going to try and log in and commit a financial fraud, try pay funds away to a beneficiary. So now we have Timothy's credentials, but now the fraudster is logging in. So he's logging in for the first time. So it could be that he's less familiar. So his typing's not as accurate. First of all, it's got to be not on caps locks. And as a result, we're really seeing that his movements are not as consistent. And then he puts in the password, gets it wrong, starts again, and is now able to log in. So at the very beginning, we know a whole bunch of things as they log in. Number one, we know that the device is new. We can see that their time was long, that the way that they accessed the account wasn't as fluid as before. We also see a red arrow telling us already something's wrong. Now, we've given the fraudster access to the account at this stage, but they're spending very, very long because they're not familiar. They want to see how much money is in the account because they want to move the funds out. And now they want to try and get to the most risky part of the page, which is the transfer funds. At this stage, Trusteer sends a message to the bank to say deny, do a step up, or do not allow any further interaction until we know who this person is, because we feel that the session's gone too far based on what we know, and the bank responds with a very generic server connection error. We don't tell the fraudster they've been caught. We would tell the bank to put up a sign to say connection error, error 404, issue, please contact the bank, to try convince the fraudster to not participate, not continue, but a legitimate user will contact the bank and try to sort out the issue. So what did Trusteer uncover this time round? We can see firstly a red background telling us something is unusual. We can see it's now no longer trusted. There was an attempted transaction made from a suspicious device using spoofed attributes. So the device was new, it hadn't been seen before. It tried to do a transaction, but the device itself was already considered highly suspicious. So let's look at the 3 pillars again. Not everything will be fraudulent, obviously. What is risky is there is an indication of spoofing on the device, and the device is not trusted, it's not been seen before, it's not been profiled in this user or profiled in the region. From the session, the location is new. There was an indication of phishing that caused us to believe that this was a criminal act, and a sensitive user action of attempting to do a transaction from this highly risky session. From an identity point of view, we can see that the way the mouse was moving, the lack of clarity in it was highly suspicious. All that together, Trusteer passes on a score of 800 out of 1,000 with the recommendation of allow login, restrict, meaning we recommend it to allow this access, but if they try to do something riskier, then we will take preventative action. So let's see this in the back end. If we go down to our account takeover, a fraud detected at login, all the information will be the same. So I'm going to go through any of this. I just want to show you the update of the risk. The update of the risk now reflects what we saw on the side, a score of 800, allow login, restrict, and an attempted transaction from a suspicious device using spoofed attributes. I'm now going to log into the front-end Trustboard. And we can quickly, for the remaining 9 minutes, look at how one could analyze an access or a fraud, a access or a risky behavior using the front-end GUI. So firstly, this is Trusteer's front-end known as Trustboard. Each bank customer is a PUID. A PUID is a hashed credential, like what you see over here. We as Trusteer do not collect any PII. We do not know who the individual is behind there. We simply get a set of hashed credentials. Each one of these represents a customer, and here you can see this is my test PUID, and all the different alerts that have been created are generated under my PUID, and I can go very, very granularly into analyzing each account. So first thing, as we access the account, we can see that there's a we call the lollipop, which shows for a particular day how many accesses have been risky. And if you look at over here, it gives the last 2 by way of summary. You can also, this only has the fraudulent alerts. If you wanted to put in the legitimate accesses, you can see that the difference between the gray and the orange. I'm focusing only on the alerts themselves. So we just had an alert with a score of 800. We see it represented here. The time is 1:51 where I am. We can see that the activity was logged in. The score was 800. The device was a web device. The reason for the alert was spoofed attributes. Have to make it a little bit smaller for a second. The recommendation was allow login. We have some other information which I'll just quickly speak to. Let me just scroll. I just need to scroll across a little bit. You can also see things like the customer session ID, the device ID, the country, etc. And if a fraud analyst wants, they can add a lot more information to the page in whatever order they like to assist in their analysis. So once the analysis is complete, the analyst can update the classification. Right now it's listed as pending. I'll make this bigger. They can update it to a confirmed legitimate or a confirmed fraudulent access. And if they know what the fraud was, they could actually go as granular as to say this was a remote access tool or social engineering scam. Let's say social engineering for our purposes. You can update it over there. This automatically sends a message to Trusteer's backend. This device will be included in Trusteer's consortium data that as soon as it's there, if a fraudster will try access any account again, the score will update to that of 1,000 of a known fraudster device. Trusteer also provides a lot more information to go by simply clicking in the drop down. Things like what is the underlying basis for Trusteer's assumption this is risky. It's a risky device. It's got the full name of the description of the fraud, attempted transaction from a suspicious device using spoofed attributes. It's got the location, and it's got the pinpoint session ID, which is an internal marker to identify that session. So every session gets a permanent user ID, which is a hash credentials, plus a customer session ID and a session ID, so we can always locate that session. Trusteer has very strong reporting capabilities with lots of XY drop-downs. One can pretty much search for whatever you're looking for here in multiple different platforms, and it can be exported via CSV, PNG, and JPG. Trusteer has search functionality that one could search for a whole different range of attributes in order to find specific things. So if one wanted to see if that IP address had been used before in fraud, it would pull it up and see any other unusual behaviors. And I think I might just do that very quickly to give you an idea. If I get the IP address from here, let's see if anything else is happening there. All the alerts on this IP address, we can see there's been many alerts, 112 of them. This IP was first seen 6 months ago. It's accessed 21 different accounts, considered highly unusual and highly suspicious to have an IP that has been part of so many accesses. And finally, to conclude my session for today, all the regular regulatory things like audit trail, user management, and configuration is part of the Trust Board. So in conclusion, a big thank you to everybody for joining me today. Trusteer protects against fraud in both the new account stage and the account takeover ranges, multiple analysis per session to see changes of behavior from the time of login to post-login, does it in both the web and the mobile channel, and combines the vast network and behavioral data to analyze the session and pass a score. A highly risky access will get a score between 500 and 1,000 with a reason and a recommendation. I will now stop sharing and thank everybody for their time.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, for your presentation. It was nice. I am sure people will have a lot of questions, but let them probably write them to us later. For now, we are here. We'll thank you once again for presenting and hope to see you on our next events.
Thanks very much for the opportunity. It's been great.
Okay.
Thank you.
And thank you.